I built a mountain range in hardcore Minecraft. This is a follow-up to the video on my main channel. If you haven't seen that already, you should probably go watch that before this. And in this video, I'm going to go over some stuff more in depth and talk about some things that I didn't have time to in the main video. Let's start with how long this video took to make, and that includes setting everything up, recording, editing, all that stuff. I started on May 19th, and I pretty much ended on August 2nd. That's 75 days, or about 2.5 months it took to make this. As for the total time spent playing in the game, I ended the last video on day 730, and I ended this video on day 1350, and I'd say I pretty much picked up right where I left off, so I'm not going to account for days in between. That's 620 days played for this video, and most of those days are with no sleep. Something interesting that I'm feeling right now in this moment is that this video, the mountains video, I feel like took less time than the 100 farms video did. And I think that has something to do with how our minds remember things that were monotonous and boring versus things that were different and more interesting. Most of my time spent on this video was running in a line, holding down left click, or right click I mean, placing blocks, and that was it. Also, because of that, I struggled to find content to make out of that. I think I did alright, but if you compare the amount of time spent versus how that's reflected in the total video time, you'll see that the second half of the video has way more time spent playing in the game than the first half does. That's nothing surprising though. Last year I made a video where I built the world map and it was pretty much the same deal. Let's move on to my stats after the end of that video, and specifically blocks placed, because if we look here, yep, top 5 blocks are all the materials I used for the mountain, and then everything else is well below that. The block I placed the most is snow. That is over 1 million snow blocks placed, and the total for all of these is around 2 million. Before I start gathering materials, I mentioned that the mountain is going to be 4 million blocks, and the reason it's not that many is because I decided to integrate it into the terrain that already existed in the world. When I took the schematic from corner to corner of the World Painter map, that was 4 million blocks, around 4 million. It would end up looking awkward if I had a giant 2000 by 2000 square where the terrain suddenly dropped off and then started on what was part of the original World Painter map. And so integrating it into the terrain, kind of just starting the mountain where the natural terrain starts, no matter how high or low that is, that ended up looking better, I think, and it saved me some blocks in time. It's not perfect though, because there are some spots where it drops off like this, but it's really hard to notice, especially when you're on the mountain. There's also these 2 holes that I used TNT bombing machines to clear out because there was a larger mountain that would have been in the way of a custom mountain that I wanted to make. It looks pretty bad. You can obviously see the square shape, but I don't know, it might have looked even worse if I hadn't done that. Either way, it wouldn't take a whole lot of time to smooth this out later. In the video, I tried to document everything that I was doing so someone could theoretically follow along and do it for themselves, which I definitely would not recommend. The thing is, that's not entirely true because there are a few things that I left out, and this is the perfect place to talk about that. First of all, I did a lot of experimenting with World Painter since this was only the second time I had used it to make mountains, which is the only thing I've ever used it for. These are the first mountains I ever made, and I didn't want them to look like this, so I had a lot of experimenting to do, and I didn't quite show that through the video because that would have ended up being kind of boring. Something else I didn't show is that after I had made the World Painter map, I went through and I did a lot of edits by hand, and by hand I mean with Axiom. I polished things up by smoothing the terrain and also painting over some of the rock colors that didn't fit. If I was to take a schematic of what the state of the mountain was at that point, it would have been very inaccurate when it comes to the amount of blocks needed, because it's not hollow. I'm sure there's a way, but I'm not sure how to make hollow terrain in World Painter. So instead, I split up the world into sections, and then I used World Edit to hollow it out. The reason I had to split it up is so my game wouldn't crash. The way I figured out the block count was I took a schematic of the entire mountain, and with Lightmatica's material list function, I could see a list of all of the blocks that I needed. Something that could be seen, but I doubt anyone would pick up on, is that I had to remake the top section of the snow farm because I apparently had downloaded the wrong version, which could easily break, so I had to redo that. That was around the time that I was putting together the mob switch, which I did mention in the video, but I did not properly express how annoying and difficult it was to set up. Even now, I think it's still not technically working in version 1.21, at least the off switch isn't working. So the next time that I want to activate mob spawning again, I will have to get 70 more zombie villagers. I'm making this world free to download for anybody, and I'm sure there's going to be people who don't know where to go, so I wrote this book full of coordinates, so if there's something you want to find in my world, it should all be in here. That's all I wanted to share for this follow-up bonus video. I'm sure there's something that I'll wish I would have said later on, but who cares.